And welcome back to the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by a good friend of Liberty University and the Standing for Freedom Center. It is Dr. Jay Richards here at the Heritage Foundation and author of numerous books. I love the one on the human advantage, by the way. But the book is titled Fight the Good Fight, How an Alliance of Faith and Reason Can Win the Culture War. I love the optimism.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we are. We've been in the culture wars for some time.
Yep.
Some might even say as far back as the first century, when Christ came out of the grave. Right,
Yeah.
Easter's coming up, Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
So declaring the fact that Jesus Christ had victory over sin and over death. But obviously, He established the church,
Yeah.
and this generation will not pass away until all these things have come to pass. So the kingdom of God is now here among us. Tell us a little, define what culture war is.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of definitions that are out there,
Right.
and people have even made early declarations of defeat.
No, absolutely. I mean, there have been conservatives. I remember this happening. And from one perspective, it can feel like a long series of defeats. If we forget for a minute that Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, right, which I think shows that these sort of early declarations of defeat were wrong, still it can feel like a defeat. And especially if you think of the trajectory of the sexual revolution starting really in full in the 60s, to the present, where I would say the stage we're at now is the stage in which we're literally sterilizing kids and destroying their capacity to reproduce. That feels like a series of defeats, from Roe v. Wade to Obergefell to the Bostock decision in 2020, at least in the courts. And so I think that's why some social conservatives sort of prematurely, I think, said the culture war is over and we lost, things like that. The culture war is just, as we mean it in the book, just a disagreement over the meaning of human nature, the meaning of society, the purpose of politics, all these kind of fundamental questions, as opposed to a situation in which you have a broad cultural consensus on certain fundamental truths. And so I just think it's simply an apt description to say, okay, look, in the United States of America in 2024, we have a population that disagrees on the most fundamental things. So basically think of all the claims of Genesis 1. God created, so whether there's a God, right, or matter is all that matters. God created us male and female. That's not just about marriage, it's about marriage. It's also about whether there are males and females, literally, right? These are contested. And what it means to be fruitful and multiply. Should we flourish economically and be able to create wealth that wasn't there before? Should we be able to have as many kids as we want? All those questions are contested. And I would say that's a change from, say, the American founding up until the end of the 19th century. The fundamental disagreement in the American founding was, of course, the unsettled business of slavery, for which we ended up having a war. So there's no doubt about that. Nevertheless, there would be what I would call a kind of a background, vaguely Christian theistic consensus. That's what I will call it, in which the existence of a creator, the basis of our rights being grounded in the creator, were public truths, not sectarian claims, but truths that everybody thought were knowable by reason and foundational to the American experiment. Fast forward to 2024, none of that's true anymore. We have a contested public square. We have arguments about these fundamental claims. And somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong on this because they're in some ways mutually exclusive. And so it's silly to say that we're not having a culture war, for Christians in particular, to say, well, I don't really like to talk about culture war. Let's not do that. Let's have a truce. A truce means that there's agreement on both sides. A one-sided truce is surrender. And let's be clear what we're talking about. But the other thing is, look, if you think humans are made in the image of God, if you think there's intrinsic value and dignity to unborn human life, if you think what marriage is the social recognition and institution of this biological truth about male and female and mating, those things are true or false, right? And so this idea that, well, okay, these debates are sort of passé, that's absurd. We might have temporary defeat. But if a sort of reigning political ideology is contrary to reality, it can't be a kind of permanent victory. It's always going to fall apart. And that's what I think is happening now, is that people imagined, okay, legal marriage gets dissolved in 2015, let's just quit having these arguments. The consequences of those things are going to work themselves out. And that's where I think we are in 2024. So that a lot of people that wouldn't have been with social conservatives in 2015 are now saying, wait, we're sterilizing kids? were putting males in female prisons, that's a completely different situation. And that's our argument in the book, that we're in a different moment in which there are possibilities for creating a new kind of coalition that didn't exist before.
So you're looking for a university that's perfect for you, a school that has anything you could possibly need.
Anything?
You want a place that has the programs you want to study, and maybe a few more just in case you change your mind.
I think I'm going to sign up for the fashion design program.
All right. A place with state-of-the-art facilities. I mean, look at this campus.
And who doesn't love big-time sports?
And great recreational activities.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Somewhere you can hike, slide, strike, shoot, climb, eat, and most importantly, eat. You want a place that takes you to space? Okay, maybe not, but we can teach you how to fly, or pastor a church, or run a business. And all that with a great view? Yeah, I think I know a place.
Well said. You know, it's interesting statistically, this bears itself out. The Gallup poll in the past couple of years has dipped below 50%, where people are going back to sort of these 2008 numbers on the gay marriage question. Just on gay marriage, which you would think, well, these are now established as traditional moral values at this point, you know, because of the Overton window has moved so far to the left. But actually what's happening with the sterilization of children, and then I would even say, you know, grooming and the rise of sort of, you know, people coming out and making these statements about pedophilia, all of a sudden people are waking up and saying, you know what, I don't think that was such a good idea. And actually, let's take this all the way back to, I don't even think gay marriage was a good idea. And so there are people who are waking up to these distortions, and it's always going to be contested. The other thing, and I think you point this out quite well, you know, progeny has a way of defining our destiny.
Yes.
If you have a generation who is fully sterilized and they're not going to have kids, the likelihood that they're going to be able to transmit their ideology or their cultic belief in gender affirmation and all these, you know, the alphabet soup of sexuality, the idea that they're going to be able to transmit that to the next generation, who, by the way, you think about Christian children of faith, whatever they might be, Jewish, Orthodox, whatever, they're going to say, hey, not my kids.
Yeah.
So you hit a certain threshold where then there is a cultural backlash where they say, not anymore.
Well, you're describing a kind of demographic thing that I think people aren't thinking about. So just think about it. So if you have a segment of the population, this is just a mental experiment. So you have one segment of the population that believes that children are carbon footprint, that they're all cost and no benefit, that they're going to destroy the earth if they have kids, that are in some cases putting their kids on cross-sex hormones and even surgeries that sterilize them, that has given up on the permanence of marriage. You have another segment of the population that believes that we're called to marriage, that believes that we're called to have children and to raise them up, right? That believes God told them to be fruitful and multiply. Okay, just in pure Darwinian terms, how's that going to work out, right? And so this is why, now the other side is, the smart ones are thinking, yeah, that is a problem. And so that's why they put so much effort on recruiting the other people's kids, right? Because they're not, if they're not going to reproduce, then they're going to recruit. That is actually, I think, what's happening. And in fact, there was a researcher in Germany, I read an article by a few years ago that actually worried about this. He said, atheism in Darwinian terms doesn't confer a selective advantage because atheists tend not to have very many kids. And so he's worried atheism will get weeded out of the gene pool. I mean, it's a very kind of strange dynamic. Now, the truth of the matter is that most, even most Christians are barely reproducing at replacement rate. But if you take the segment of the population and sort of frame it in terms of religious intensity, which is essentially attending worship at least once a week or more than once a week, what you see is that this is a different demographic group than everyone else. And so, that's not a full-scale plan for cultural renewal, but I mean, it is a dynamic that I think people don't take seriously enough.
It was Peter Berger who said, something along the lines of that quote about, India is the most religious nation on earth in terms of people.
And Sweden's the most
atheistic, right?
Yes.
And America is a nation of
Indians ruled by Swedes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brilliantly said. But what's interesting is that there is this level of affluence. Sometimes when you reach a level of cultural affluence, it's like Romans 1. Yeah. People are given over to their sort of debased and depraved desires, and instead of worshiping the Creator, right, they go to creation. And what's interesting, I just saw this today. There was some pastor down in Texas kind of pointed this out. If you look at atheism, atheism is actually a white liberal belief. Most Christians around the world are actually women of color and largely in countries, developing nations. Yeah. And so they're poor. And so you think, well, what's the religion of religious suppression, or what is the definition of white supremacy? It's actually atheism.
Yeah, well, that's what's funny. I know, in fact, I saw just today. It was an African leader referring to the UN's desire to impose crazy gender ideology on the so-called global South as cultural imperialism, as colonialism, which is exactly what it is. It's like the fixation of white Northern European and North American secular leftists transmitted through these transnational organizations on billions of people that don't want it. I mean, I don't know what else to call that, but cultural imperialism.
Yeah. Okay. So I love the optimism that it can be won. Yeah. The culture wars can be won, both faith and reason, which you go back to whether it be Hume or Kant, right? Yeah. Those two things. Yeah. One was the idea that reason is the base objective of everything. The other one is the critique of pure reason, that we need to have faith. But those things are not at odds.
No,
right?
They're not. Yeah, I mean, as long as you understand faith in the Christian sense as trust in God, not just trust in a set of propositions, but trust in the personal God. That's what faith is. Paul is quite clear that, he's perfectly happy to say, when he's talking about the resurrection, he's citing the evidence that the resurrection actually happened. Those things aren't opposed. And unfortunately, of course, the so-called Enlightenment put these at war and claimed that faith is this kind of obscurantist private thing, elevated a particular type of reason, which I think was a sort of proper understanding of reason. And then some Christians do this too. They say, well, you just have to take it on faith, as if there's no sort of reasons for these things. Look at the American founders. Even the least sort of orthodox of the American founders managed to understand both that there is a natural law and natural moral truths that are available to people. Atheists know that murder is wrong just as well as Christians do, right? At the same time, there's no church of the natural law. You need robust religious belief and practice to reinforce those things. And I think, honestly, there's a debate on the right now about whether the American founding and the principles of the founding are worth maintaining. I think they are. I think they need to be reinvigorated. I think that the consensus that existed after the founding on these things is the best and most stable of the alternatives. That's going to require political activity. It's also going to require cultural and moral activity. It's going to frankly require that the Holy Spirit do something that we can't do. But this idea that everything is lost, I would say it's a very narrow and truncated kind of historical perspective. It's looking at recent American history as opposed to looking at all of Western history, just Western history, the way in which both Christianity and culture waxed and waned over time. And sometimes at the very worst moments, and it's the very worst moment right before there's some kind of renewal. And I think the fact that 5 years ago, there were atheists that I'm arguing with on social media that I am now working with because we think males and females are real. That's different, right? That's kind of a different dynamic. And I think what's happened is that the kind of elite public official philosophy of our culture is now deranged. It doesn't claim kind of secular reason. It's in fact a radical kind of postmodern denial of those things. So that even just your ordinary kind of unbelieving scientist who still thinks some stuff is true, suddenly they're our allies and they are starting to see us as allies. So I think that's an opportunity both long-term for evangelism and cultural renewal, but it's also an opportunity for building a type of alliance that we wouldn't probably have thought about 10 years ago.
Since 1971, Liberty University has had one mission: training champions for Christ. We've been at this for a while, and in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, we have grown to be a global force. Today, Liberty runs over 100,000 students around the globe, studying across 15 colleges and schools. And, among them, over 30,000 military students. Across 700 programs of study, we train as one: nurses, artists, business leaders of the future and today. Together, we work to give back through service trips, local community work, and over 500,000 volunteer hours per year. And we play just as hard as we study, with 20 NCAA athletic programs and 40 club sports teams. So, who are we? We are Liberty University, and we train champions for Christ.
You know, in the way that sometimes so-called climatologists will say, well, because weather was bad in my neighborhood, therefore I'm going to, pontificate on this wider thing that, globally this is happening everywhere and da-da-da-da-da. And that's not science. But then you also have Christians that, because it is getting a little rough in our neck of the woods, right? Not seeing the wider what's happening globally in terms of the growth of the church and the number of Christians who claim faith in the triune God. That's growing. There is an ascendancy globally of Christianity worldwide. What we're seeing, though, is the decline, particularly in America, that once enjoyed that consensus.
That's right.
But now we're going to have to contend for the faith, once for all delivered to the saints, for this next generation. Do you think that in our lifetime, so I think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, writing Gulag Archipelago, and he really did believe that the communist empire of Russia could last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
He lived to see it dismantled.
That's right.
So he saw the rise and then the fall. Do you think that in our lifetime we can see this turnaround?
Absolutely. I mean, Whittaker Chambers is another example of a famous author of Witness, who was a leftist and a communist American, changed his mind, and at the time he did, and turned against the Communist Party in the United States, thought he was joining the losing side. He had no idea that, in fact, no, he was joining the winning side. That was a decisive victory. And notice it happened ultimately without a lot of bloodshed when the Soviet Union collapsed. A lot of us, and I think me included, sort of thought, okay, well, that debate has been settled. The reality is that the same ideas that beset the Soviet Union, they just sort of transformed into something that we're now calling a kind of woke ideology. I just think these fights are perennial. Battles go one way or the other. Americans are not guaranteed that the American experiment's going to be around when God establishes his kingdom. I sort of hope so. Yeah. But we have a responsibility at the moment in the country in which we live. And if we think the things we believe are true, that means that the people that deny them are ultimately advocating a set of ideas that are contrary to reality. And if you propose things that are contrary for reality, reality has a say, ultimately. And I think we need a little bit more confidence just in the truth in reality to ultimately out itself, and to be looking for ways in which these kind of social dynamics that we took for granted suddenly change. Because I think that's where we are now. Yeah. It was different as recently as 2015 with, say, Obergefell and same-sex marriage. I think gender ideology is so crazy and so contrary to people's direct experience, right? That it's waking a lot of people up. And those people are noticing the next stop. Actually, the next stop is the destruction of the age of consent. It's the sexualization of children. In fact, we're already pulling into that station. And I can tell you there's a lot of people that think abortion's fine, divorce, same-sex marriage, all this stuff, had no problems with. All of a sudden they're like, this is crazy. All my friends must be crazy. How did we get here? Yeah. And that's the question we have yet to have, right? They realize, okay, the current situation is crazy. What our friends need to also realize is that gender ideology didn't drop out of the sky. It was the result of a series of ideas that's been working their way through our culture for decades.
Okay, so I'm thinking about, somebody who might be listening, working class family, middle class family. They've got kids who they're preparing for they're adolescent, but they're preparing for college for the future. How would you counsel them long term? Is this a bumpy ride? Does it still matter that they go off to a university? Does it still matter that they prepare for the things that have always mattered?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is that from the last 200 years, even until now, some
Yes,
are
absolutely.
saying, "Hey, don't do college. College is a scam."
Right.
Charlie Kirk is a friend.
Yeah.
But I also at the same time I think, well, right. But we still need doctors, we still need lawyers,
Absolutely.
we still need people who are advocating for these things in the public square. What do we do?
Well, I would say, okay, this is just my private opinion here, about half the people that go to college should go to college.
Right.
So I think there's half of those people actually should go to college, and it makes sense for them for whatever their sort of vocation is. The other half shouldn't and isn't actually going to benefit from it, probably going to end up in debt. And so people have to, for themselves, decide, okay, what are you really called to do, right? But if you're called to a skilled trade, maybe 4 years and sort of racking up a lot of debt is a bad idea. At the same time, as Christians, we are responsible for arming our children. And part of arming our children is arming them intellectually, inoculating them against bad ideas. So I believe the best possible thing for those that can afford it is to give your child a robust, broad, classical education, and then if they need college education, make sure you send them someplace where they're not going to get polluted and all your work gets undone. That's I think the general model for people that want to go to college. But I really do think maybe half the population. Look, if you want to be an electrician or a painter or a master carpenter, there's actually a better thing to do, and you'll probably make more money doing that than a lot of the things you do otherwise.
Oh, that's totally true.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. So it is possible, we can win it. Is the ride going to be bumpy?
The ride is going to be really, really bumpy. In fact, I have gotten in the habit of giving talks on the difference between so-called white martyrdom and red martyrdom, because red martyrdom is where you literally get your head chopped off, right, for the faith. And most of us sort of imagine ourselves, okay, I could do that, but we imagine ourselves being killed instantly, right, as opposed to torture. The reality is most of us are not going to experience that. What we're going to experience is a loss of reputation, a loss of job, a loss of opportunities for taking a stand for our faith. And we're just going to have to do that. And so that's what I think we need to be preparing for, is that type of white martyrdom in which our blood is not shed, but it's just 1,000 cuts socially and economically. That it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I honestly think if enough of us are willing to do that, that we will ride this out, and the future will be brighter than we can imagine.
Very well said. Dr. Jay Richards, thank you for joining us. And the book, Fight the Good Fight, How an Alliance of Faith and Reason Can Win the Culture War. I highly recommend it. Hey, did you find this helpful? I hope you did. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and also go to standingforfreedom.com where you can find more content, articles, podcasts, and our Theology of Politics series, all at standingforfreedom.com.